There was 2 seconds early. That was a second and a half early yet again. Good evening, people. Judging by the numbers of downvotes before the stream even went live, I can tell this is going to be an interesting stream. This is how accustomed I have become now to fraternizing with the alt-right. Mike Cernovich was my deep breath where I had to say, am I prepared to have people judge me for actually having discourse with people that they disagree with? And I thought long and hard with Mike, and it was the first time you do something and then you're nervous and then you realize the earth doesn't end when you have public discussions. I say that, and then lo and behold, tomorrow something bad might happen. But I cut my teeth, getting into that side of the internet with Cernovich. Then, having the live streams with Robert Barnes, who represented the Alex Jones. Oh, that was one notch over there. And then having the Alex Jones. I mean, that's when fear went out the window. But tonight we have Laurent Southern. And everyone, I noticed the typo. I didn't actually notice the typo. If I did, it wouldn't have been there. The locals community, where you can see Robert and I and support us at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, saw the typo. And it's embarrassing, but it's my life right now. So I'm going to live with that. Laurent Southern. And you might know Laurent Southern for a number of reasons. Some of you might like her. Others of you might not like her. I understand people who may take issues with Lauren and the likes of people who are antagonistic, push the envelope, provocative, make people think even if they don't want to, even if you disagree with what they're saying. I don't understand the name calling that goes along with certain types, Cernovich being one, Lauren being the other. But we're going to get into it. It's going to be a good one. If you don't know Laurent Southern, so Lauren had a problem with Patreon where she was deplatformed. I think it was in 2017. She's been a vocal critic of certain political issues. She's been a vocal spokesperson for others. We're going to get into all of this. And yeah, she has been, if you go to her Wikipedia page, it's amazing that Wikipedia just, if they don't like you, you're alt-right. And I still don't know what the term alt-right means just based on the people that they lump in there, but it's going to be a good one. So everyone's in the back room. So I'm not going to spend too much time with the intro. Everybody knows the rules. No legal advice, no medical advice. In this case, there will be minimal Australian jokes, but we're going to have them. And I'm going to break out my Aussie accent and a number of Simpson references. There is no medical advice, no legal advice. Super chats, 30% is taken by YouTube. If you don't like that, we are live streaming on Rumble as well, where they now have Rumble rants enabled, and Rumble only takes 20%. So it's better for the creator, and it's better to support a platform that supports free speech. We're live on Rumble. These all go up on Locals afterwards, which reminds me I didn't put up the last live stream on Locals Direct yet, but that's it. Now let's have Dave Portnoy on the show. One bite, everyone knows the rules. One bite, everyone knows the rules. Super chats, I'm going to try to bring them up. If it gets distracting, I won't bring them up. If I don't bring it up and you're going to be miffed, don't give the super chat, yada, yada, yada. Okay, with that said, people, let me just see if we've got anything else in the house. Keep up the good fight, Brandon Fancher. Thank you very much. Very, very nice avatar. Striking avatar. Okay, Robert's in the house. Lauren's in the house. Let's do this. 1, 2, 3. Do we like this layout or do we go with this layout? Now let's go back to the other one. Okay.
Go.
Robert, how you doing?
Cozy.
Good.
In the middle. Right in the middle. This is like the Brady's bunch of sorts. Okay, let's do a mic check. Lauren, let me hear your audio.
1, 2, 3. Do I sound all right?
Very good. Robert?
Here.
Okay, you might be a little low, so if you can speak up, and we'll let everyone else in the chat tell us what's going on. Okay, Lauren, before we delve into childhood, because I need to know your childhood to understand how you got to be where you are in terms of personality and place of life. We're going to get there, and I have questions. I know them. Elevator pitch as to who you are for anybody watching who might not know who you are.
Yeah, I am a Canadian political commentator. A lot of people think I'm American, but I'm actually not. I probably did some pretty intense political activism interviews for about 4 or 5 years. I was with Rebel Media for a bit, went on my own, and then I left to go get married, have a kid, been loving that, and I've come back and have been back in the political commentary world for about a year now, a little over a year.
Now, you were some of the videos I was watching, I think, were from 2018. You were 23 years old back then. Are you 26 now?
Yes. Yeah.
And you have a kid. Where is your kid now?
He is napping.
Okay.
And
Excellent. Now,
hopefully we'll stay napping throughout this show. Prayers
it
in the
would
chat,
not-
please.
it won't be the first time a kid has interrupted a live stream. Okay, so Lauren, let's start from the very, very beginning. Canadian. What part of Canada are you from?
I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia at the moment. I've been in Australia for the last year as my husband is an Aussie. But yeah, born and raised here. West Coast, best coast.
And how many siblings did you have? What did your parents do? And how many generations old Canadian is your family?
Yeah, I have one older sister. She is a DJ. My family moved here in the 40s, 50s, during / right after the war from Denmark on my dad's side. My mom's mother was an orphan who escaped a abusive household that she was sent to after the war on a ship at like 15, 16 to Canada. And yeah, that's my family history.
Where was your mom from?
My mom, she grew up in Canada, was born and raised here.
But yeah. she came in, she was the orphan who came in from
my grandma. So that's
okay.
So my grandmother who had her. Yeah. My grandmother was born in London. War broke out. She was orphaned, and then they sent her to Australia. So they sent a bunch of war orphans to Adelaide, actually. She was sent to a really bad home. Obviously, they didn't have the same kind of checks and balances as they do today for adoption. And yeah, so she escaped on a ship to Canada when she was like 16 years old. And they spent a lot of time, my mom growing up, dumpster diving and hitchhiking across the country. And eventually they got their shit together and I was born, and I have absolutely amazing parents, the best mother and father in the world.
And what do they do for a living growing up?
My mom did jobs here and there, usually secretary positions, and my father did web design and still to this day does web design.
And in Vancouver or around Vancouver?
Vancouver. Well, like around in the outside area. I'm not going to dox myself here.
Well, what was it like? Because I mean, I see politically you have Vancouver, and then you have like the rest of that area, which is a little bit different politically. What was it like growing up in Vancouver?
So I was on the Bible Belt, like Langley, Aldergrove. I don't know if you know that area. That's where I kind of grew up. But yeah, it was fairly conservative community growing up for sure. We started in Surrey, which has become, is Surrey, like, I reckon they'd be NDP or something now. I have no idea. But we moved from Surrey to Langley particularly. And I know people get offended when we say this, but there was like just massive migration issues. And by migration issues, I mean, people literally weren't even speaking English in the community I grew up in anymore. So like my parents are the most open people in the world, love meet, talk to anyone. But when you can't even speak English to your fellow community members, that's kind of a barrier you can't overcome, right? So we moved out to Langley.
And was it Asian speaking or was it another demographic?
Largely Indian in Surrey. And I mean, there's a large Asian community there as well, but largely Indian.
And now, I mean, I guess the question is this: what type of childhood did you have that you ended up being the provocateur of politics? So you're a teenager. Are you a troublemaker? Are you a good student? How do you grow up and then become fearless, whether anyone likes you or not, but the fearless provocateur that you've become?
Oh man. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I couldn't pinpoint an exact moment, but I'd get like 100% in classes that I was super interested in. If I wasn't interested in it, it was like an F in the class. That's just kind of a stereotypical. I have ADHD, so that's a pretty typical thing that happens with that kind of that hyper focus. But my dad listened to a lot of conservative radio when I was growing up, and he didn't force it on me in any way whatsoever. He just kind of asked me questions if I learned something in class. But I'd say the main point that pushed me politically to really get involved was when I was forced to take one of the first not forced to take, actually, it was an elective that I took. It was one of the first social justice classes that was introduced in Canada, grade 12. And they put us in front of lockers, split us up by race and gender, and told us, you're privileged, you're not, based on sexuality, age, whatever it may be. And I remember sitting there and I knew all of the kids around me. And I was like, I know that kid on the privileged side of the wall is extremely wealthy. I know this kid, or on the non-privileged side, is extremely wealthy. I know that kid on the privileged side of the wall is in an abusive family. I know that this is not matching up with the reality that I know from the people in my class. This is insane. What is going on? Why is this a class or an elective? I was at Walnut Grove Secondary School. I think even though it was published by an Atlantic journalist that I lied about this course existing, the course curriculum is actually still public online. And you can find it there.
So people put this into perspective. This is within the last decade, right? I mean, you're in high school 10 years ago or 11 years ago.
2012, I think.
20?
Yeah.
My good. I mean, I graduated in 96 and that feels like just yesterday. So you're graduating high school in 2012 and this is what's going on in our conscious lifetime. And I was never aware of it.
Yeah, so you wouldn't know. Like, kids aren't coming home and excitedly telling their parents, we did a privilege test in class today, unless you're like directly asking and directly involved as a parent, and this isn't getting reported in the media. I mean, you're not going to know. Of course not.
Yeah, and how much was that? Like, was that something you had seen glimpses of in the Canadian school system, or was that kind of just new in 2012?
I'd say it was pretty new because I don't remember things being so racially motivated when I was growing up. No one cared, especially when I was in like elementary school and earlier high school. It started really ramping up when I was late in high school, and I'd say definitely university. That's where it was like a brick wall. I could not believe the kind of stuff I was hearing there.
Now, get to the experience in high school. When it happens, do you reject it? Do you raise your voice against it? Do you go along with it and it just leaves a lasting impact? How did you respond to it at the time, if you remember?
Oh yeah, I was actively like after class questioning, talking to the teachers. I remember that teacher particularly was giving me, let me check the author because I don't want to get it wrong, but she was giving me like after class reading to try to challenge my perception of the class. And let me see. I think she was giving me Naomi Klein books or something, kind of a leftist ecofeminism is what it says here, left-wing labor politics, criticism of global fascism and capitalism. So those were the books that she was giving me to read after class when I would go and ask her questions about what we were learning. But yeah, I would stand up and I would write essays and I would do speeches, and the teachers did not quite like it, but there was still a bit of free speech then, you know. I was still allowed to ask questions, which I respect, even if I don't respect what was necessarily being taught in the class. That completely changed by the time I was in university. I was full on kicked out of multiple classes.
And which university was this in Canada?
University of the Fraser Valley, generally a very good university. Wonderful professor there, Ron Dart, probably piqued a bit of my interest in observing more of an criticism of liberalism approach to politics. So obviously there's good and bad in the institutions. His advice to me was always find the university within the university. Find the people and the professors, because the whole system is broken, but there are individuals in there that are still seeking truth. There are other students you can find, and you have to build kind of a little social club within.
Now, how did that transition into independent media?
Oh man, I went to a conference called Conserving Energy. This was like ages ago. It's like 2019. Ezra Levant was holding it in Toronto. And I had a local radio show with my very good friend who was a Marxist. Didn't see him for years. And when I saw him like 6 years later, he was wearing a MAGA hat. Blew my mind. But we had a show called Liberty Now, where I, as a libertarian, would argue with him as a Marxist. And we had 2 listeners at our university. Like, no one listened to the show. And I just applied, put that down, said I had a little local university show. And I got accepted to go to the conference. Went there, met Ezra. I was such a huge fangirling, got his book signed and everything. And they called me 2 weeks later and said, hey, would you like to make a video for Rebel Media? At the time, I was considering joining the military, and I had put in my application and everything. And I was going to try and do military intelligence. And I was like, oh, this will just be a small video that will help me with my public speaking a bit, right? It was my Why I'm Not a Feminist video, and it got over 1 million views. It was like 30 million views on Facebook. And I was like, well, there goes any other career. But no, it was awesome. It was really cool to see that.
When did you start? So that's when you first started a YouTube channel. I mean, you're relatively fresh. You're relatively new to the platform.
Yeah, well, that was on Rebel Media. That was my first video. So I did that Why I'm Not a Feminist video with Rebel. It went crazy viral, like blew my mind because I had never done anything on YouTube before, right? And it just kind of took off from there. I made a few more videos. I started going to the slut walk and questioning slut walk protesters about whether there's a rape culture in the West.
What for those who may not be familiar, what exactly is slut walk?
Oh, are those not a thing anymore? So girls would go out and they would protest rape culture. And I think there was a cop it may have been, I think it was Ontario actually that started it. He made a comment about how girls shouldn't dress that way or wear very little because they're inviting potential, assault. And girls decided to do a slut walk across the country where they would dress in very little clothes and say, we're not asking for it, essentially. Now, my question typically would be along the lines of, I believe that, of course, rape happens. Of course, assault happens, horrific things, but I don't think we live in a rape culture. I think using hyperbolic language like that is not helpful. It suggests that our institutions don't actually oppose rape, which they do. So if we want to solve this problem, we have to actually observe and prescribe what the problem is accurately. And then also, how does walking around naked prevent rape? I just didn't see it as a particularly helpful event. That was my opinion at the time.
It's one of the trends of protest. For whatever the reason, the protest is more legitimate when it's done naked or with minimal clothing, regardless of what the subject matter is. And we've seen a lot of the videos go viral I don't know what it is. There seems to be a certain degree of exhibitionism that goes along with protest of certain vocal protesters. And I think I have seen a bunch of those videos where you ask questions to the participants of the slut walk as you're doing this. For those who haven't seen them, what sort of questions would you ask the people participating in these events?
Oh man. Sorry. I was definitely very spicy with my line of questioning then, but I remember one girl in particular, I think she was holding a sign regarding like, if I regret rape or something, or if I regret having sex with a guy, then that's rape and it should be accepted as rape. And I asked her, I'm like, so if you consensually have sex with a guy one night and then the next morning you decide you didn't want it, is that rape? And she was like, of course it is. So I just get these bizarre answers that would clearly, and we'd get in a bit of a back and forth, and people watching being exposed to what some of these radical activists actually felt and thought, I think was quite shocking for the audiences at the time. They were like, I kind of thought a lot of these people marching were just like, rape is bad. It was like a don't kick the puppies campaign. But there were genuinely some very radical perspectives in these groups that hadn't really been exposed in the internet before. In fact, I think that sort of going and interviewing protesters was very new when I started it. I'm sure it had happened before. Streeters had existed before, but actually going into protests as someone from the opposite side challenging them was very new when I was doing it in like 2019.
And what gave you the comfort level or the confidence to do that? In other words, I mean, you're relatively young. You're going into a protest group and you're challenging, hey, why do you believe this crazy thing? Why do you believe this? What led to that?
I think you can probably physically see me shaking in the first slut walk I did. Like I was literally like so nervous, so confrontational. I don't know. I had this complete lack of fear. I don't know where it came from or how it came about. I can't tell you, but it just got better or worse, however you want to perceive it, with time. Like I was even more confident going into these protests. And it got to a point where when it was my job and when I was working at Rebel and this is what I did, I exposed what happened in these protests, I would almost get like a kick of energy from the argument. And I do think you have to be a bit of a weird person to enjoy confrontation. Most people don't. Most people are terrified of any sort of confrontation. And I've probably pulled that back a little in recent years, being a mom, getting a kick out of and enjoying confrontation and literally getting fired up by it. Probably not the healthiest trait to have as a wife and a mother. So I've reeled that back a bit.
Well, because here's the thing. I saw a number of the walks where you go to the protests, people say it like it's like you're not allowed doing it. You're deliberately provocative. You go in there needling the people who are there rejoicing together. because they all believe in the same thing, and you have one loudmouth who comes in asking questions which are irritating, which they don't have answers to, and you're spoiling the parade. On the one hand, explain why why people should not get angry when someone comes in and does in fact piss on their parade by ruining it and forcing them to actually think about it. How are you not just a pain in the neck looking for attention versus bringing a legitimate voice that they didn't ask for?
Well, I think had I gone and done those protests, right, and people didn't freak out and try to kick me out and have this just visceral response, they wouldn't have gone viral, right? Some of the videos, like I did a protest against Jordan Peterson in Toronto, and someone full on attacks me. Like the police contacted me after to file assault charges. I didn't end up doing it, but they still wrote a whole blog online about how I was horrific and trying to ruin their life. Maybe I should have. But that video basically only got the amount of views it did because these people absolutely lost their minds. And it's kind of an exposure of how fragile their ideology is. It is that weak to having any bit of pushback from a media source, giving you a platform to give your side of the story, that you have to physically assault them. You have to scream at them, throw piss on them, whatever it may be. And showing that fragility and inability to answer questions really was what started kind of the cultural movement that I think pushed even Trump into office, by a whole bunch of YouTubers and content creators that just pushed back on what was the generally accepted narrative that no one had ever thought to ask questions about. And the only thing that has really shifted that is there has been a rise of YouTubers and kind of leftist commentators that are willing to have debates now, that are willing to have conversations. And that has been a far more intelligent strategy, and obviously a far more effective one than just absolutely losing your mind hysterically.
Now, when was the first time you started experiencing them being, that kind of confrontational in response to your questions?
I mean, when was I? It would have been in 2019, like very early when I was starting. Maybe this was even 2018. When I was being, oh man, I'm getting all the dates wrong. Oh my gosh, this was like oh my gosh, this was like 2016, 2015. Time has flown. Sorry, guys. I've gotten all the dates wrong.
Don't worry. This was pre-Trump era. Better we get it out of the way now, but this is pre-Trump.
Yeah, sorry. I can't believe how long it's been. I'm blowing my mind here. Take a break for 1 year and I lose track of an entire century. Yeah. So when did I first get like attacked? I think it was, and I cringe even saying it now because it's become such a stereotypical joke, but this would have been like 2015 when I told someone I identified as an attack helicopter, and they poured a bottle of unidentified liquid over my head and were shrieking at me everywhere. But it ramped up from there. Everywhere I went, particularly Europe, I don't get it. The Europeans have like a riot culture. They've got a lot of violence. Germany was particularly scary. I had a picture taken of me and I was identified as a target. She's a fascist, she's a right-wing reporter, and she's at this Antifa protest in Hamburg. And I felt really horrible about that one because there were two guys that weren't even that particularly related to me. I didn't know them that well. One was an independent German reporter and the other was like an Associated Press photographer. And they were just in the photo with me and they got the living crap beat out of them just for being in that picture with me. Like, imagine if they had actually found me. I remember being in a cabbie, driving away, laying in the bottom of the cab, just like praying and saying, please keep driving. Do not stop. Do not stop. One of the guys I know was sent to the hospital. I think something happened to his knee or whatever, but there's this video of the Associated Press photographer on his knees begging, please don't, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're just wailing on him. That was, that was one of those moments of realization where it's like, this is no longer games. Like, people are serious about their politics right now to the point of violence. And we've only seen that ramp up over the years. And I think I probably took a break at the right time. I think back to the Patriot Prayer guy who was assassinated during the BLM protests last year, just walked up to him, shot him point blank. And it's just been ramping up since then. It's been on a steady, and this is what a lot of people kept warning about, especially in 2015, 2016. If we do not have the ability to have conversation, if we do not have the ability to go with our ideas just back and forth and treat each other like human beings, the only response is going to be violence. That's it. And that's what we've seen.
Yeah, I think for those that don't know, I mean, Antifa's origin was in Germany, a communist organization disguised as anti-fascist organization that for whom they and the Nazis loved street theater, and in particular violence, started out in the bars, then spread to the streets, and whoever won the streets was considered to have won the day. And then they sort of retrofitted it in the mid 1970s, where the favorite thing to do in Germany on May Day was for Antifa to go out and get into fights and firebomb some cops and all the rest. And that became like an annual tradition. And people forget also about the long German terrorist groups that existed throughout the 60s and 70s and even into the early 80s. But so now when was the first time you went over to Europe to cover things there?
That would have been, before. I'm scared of naming dates now.
Everyone in the
Just say
chat,
it's like AD, pre-Trump, post-Trump.
but everyone in the chat appreciates that once you become a parent, you lose track of time entirely.
Completely.
So nobody's. Don't worry about it. But let's gather our thoughts. Put a year on it.
So I think it was 2015 because I do think this was pre-Trump. I went to Europe for the first time to go report on the migrant crisis. So when I think in 2015, it was actually, you were having Syrians, like actual refugees, come in large amounts, although they were mixed with non-refugees. After that, it became mostly non-Syrians coming over, taking advantage of the initial Syrian refugee crisis. But I went there to go cover how that was all going. I went to Calais, which was the point where all of these migrants were trying to get over the water from France into Britain. I went to Belgium, Molenbeek. I spent my birthday, I think I spent my 21st birthday at a smoking bar in Molenbeek on Ramadan. It was something else. And just interviewed people about Islam in Europe and how it was affecting them, how the cultural clashes were going. Yeah, that was huge.
Well, and I think it was, while it was partially covered here, I think it was underappreciated how much it was radicalizing large parts of Europe. Even previously liberal, tolerant, pro-immigrant communities were not liking what they were seeing and witnessing and experiencing. Arguably, it's what led to Brexit by 2016. And I would run into people in Italy and France, and a lot of places just weren't the same anymore. And the culture conflict was just off the charts. The way I describe it to people is like, if you took a bunch of us from East Tennessee and dropped us in the middle of Iraq, we might not blend in well. And the same phenomenon was taking place here, just in reverse. But it was almost like it was the media narrative was always the little kid on the beach. It was that story narrative. You weren't allowed to get into, why are these all young men? Why do they not look like traditional war refugees? How exactly are they going to blend in culturally and economically when you couldn't have a broader contradiction of cultures between the two? And if you even discuss the culture, then all of a sudden it became racism or xenophobia or Islamophobia or whatever latest phobia was. Were you surprised at that institutional media narrative reaction to that, or how did you see all of that?
Well, yeah, now that, and I went back in 2018 and did a whole documentary where I was in Turkey, I was in Morocco, I was speaking to the human traffickers on the ground, meeting all of the people before they made it to Europe, and knowing even more now than I did when I initially went in 2015, I've kind of realized that most journalism is people literally sitting in their basement with a box of Cheetos, reading an article and putting their spin on it and writing it. Yep, there's for the Washington Post. Yep, there's for the New York Times. That's my opinion. They actually have no idea what's going on the ground. And if they did, they would have very different opinions and probably not have a job as well, because there's one accepted narrative and that has to go public. Like you mentioned, Alan Kurdi, the young boy who was found on the beach. I've been to the beaches in Turkey where they send off a lot of those boats to go to Lesbos. And most of the people, actually, in fact, I've spent a night hiding in an olive grove under trees while gendarme helicopters came searching for migrants over the beaches, with the migrants hiding under the trees, hoping the gendarme don't catch us, and spoken to them. And these people were living happily in Turkey for 3-4 years, businesses. One of them was a barber. And they were like, a human trafficker came up to us and told us, you're going to have an amazing life in Europe. They pay for everything. They give you a hotel. You get whatever you want. All you have to do is give us 3,000 euro and we'll get you over there. And they believe these traffickers and they buy what they're selling. In a lot of cases, it's not people fleeing. And then what actually happens is they end up in a camp in Moria, Lesbos, which has been burnt down last year because people were so mad about being trapped there. Then the only way to get to Italy is to pay a doctor with one of these government organizations 800 euros to get a fake script written up for a heart surgery in Italy. And then you have to keep paying your way. And I was up in Northern Europe. I didn't talk about this, but I was up in literally like the North Pole, and I met migrants that had worked their way all the way up there trying to find that promise from the human traffickers of, you know, this amazing paradise. But what happens is they end up sleeping under bridges. And this was what I observed both in 2015 and 2018, a bunch of miserable people that can't assimilate, that can't get jobs, that were promised the world by human traffickers and ended up homeless instead and unable to assimilate or join these cultures. And in the case of Alan Kurdi, they ended up charging the human traffickers for killing him. It wasn't Europeans. It wasn't people who said, hey, we need to have borders for a functioning country. It was the human traffickers. And no one in the media has been willing to correct this narrative, sadly.
Well, actually, speaking of that, because that was the photograph seen around the world where, you know, hitherto journalists had the standards of not showing pictures of dead children, and an exception was made for that. Seemingly, at the time, there was some discussion, some controversy as to whether or not people had access to position the child in that position so that they can then come in and get the photograph. What was the circumstances surrounding that incident, the photograph itself, and was there anything? Did the media play any role in sort of not just taking that photograph and publishing it, but in sort of, was there any manipulation in setting that photograph up, or was it an organic, terrible event that got caught by someone with a camera?
Oh, you know, I don't even know the details of how it was set up, but that sounds like, what's that? There's a movie like that. It was called Nightcrawler or something, about the journalist who went and would set up dead bodies after. Scary stuff. I don't, sorry.
No, I was gonna say, like, because you remember things as they happen, and then over time they disappear from the internet for whatever the reason. I remember there being discussion about it, but then you don't know if it's fake news at the time. People trying to undermine the crisis itself, undermine the dramatic element of that photograph. But a lot of people, when you talk about traffickers, they have a very much like Taken, the movie with Liam Neeson, which I've never seen. I just know what it's about. They have that perspective of trafficking, and they don't actually understand what trafficking is in the actual business sense. Can you explain to people out there who might be under the impression that trafficking is like what you see in Taken, but what it actually is when it comes to this type of migration?
Yeah, in this type of migration, it's in some cases less coercive, but in others, absolutely. So there were very few women in a lot of these camps. What they would be is you'd have encampments, particularly in Morocco, of people that had traveled all over from Africa, and they'd live in the mountains in these caves, and they'd save up money to pay the trafficker. And some of them would save up money, the trafficker being someone who organizes boats and different packages. So they'll offer a package to people. Okay, we'll give you a boat to Europe, and you'll get to Spain, and that's it. You pay us a $2,000 flat fee. If you want multiple chances, you have to pay a $5,000, 5,000 euro flat fee. So that's, if your first boat doesn't succeed, then you get to take a few more boats until it actually does. So you can pay for different packages. I know on the Turkish-Hungarian border, or Bulgarian border, they actually had food plans you could pay for. So it's like illegal human migration. So they're illegally moving people from one place to the other. But the coercive thing here is you would have people called small boys, which would basically work for the main trafficker, and they would go out into the community and find people and like coerce them to take these boats to Europe, sell certain ideas, show them videos. This is what Europe is like. I met a few boys in the mountains of Morocco who were like, I'm going to be a rap star when I get to Europe. I'm going to be a professional soccer player when I went to Europe. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, boys born in Europe don't even imagine doing those things because it's so impossible. But they've been told by these traffickers, this is what you're going to get. This is the package. You can pay this much, that much. There weren't very many women in these communities, and it operated differently depending on which one you went to. But the few girls that were in Morocco were typically selling themselves on the side of the road to try to pay these traffickers for basically, you know, living under their protection in the mountains and then potentially saving up to get boat trips. I know the beaches and the farms that were typically used where they would try to transport them. So they'd find kind of more private property area where they'd be less likely to be discovered by police doing trafficking. One farmer in Turkey told me they came up with guns and basically said, hey, listen, we're going to live here, we're going to squat here, or we're going to shoot your family. So a lot of people are like, oh, either they have this image that these are just heroes getting them boats and saving and putting them across the water. And then there's another image where it's like kidnapping, selling them as slaves. And it is kind of an in-between. There's a lot of coercion. There's a lot of illegal activities. There's absolutely threats of violence. There's some, sex selling when women are involved. There's semi-slavery with young boys who are basically, they're indentured to a large trafficker for 3 years of their life, trying to get people on boats so then one day they can get their boat paid for. It's a very complex industry, but it is a sick industry, and almost everyone ends up disappointed at the end, either drowned or in a country where they have no ID because they're told by the traffickers to throw out their passports so they can't be deported, so they can't get a job, they can't even apply for refugee status. Everyone is screwed over at the end of this. And the only way to stop it is, quite frankly, by shutting down the borders and shutting down their ability to traffic people.
Well, I think that's one thing that's often missed is that protecting borders is not only about your own labor supply and your own economy and culture and politics, but as long as there are open borders, they encourage, incentivize, and reward human traffickers. And in particular, that part of the world, parts of North Africa and the rest, there's a long history of human trafficking. I mean, the Barbary pirates were famous for their slavery that went both ways, including from Europe to Africa. And it was just because of how people were treated to a certain degree that you didn't have an indigenous slave population because of how they treated people was a little bit different. But that also was some of the last countries to actually make it illegal. Or often in the same parts of the world. So there's a different mindset in some of those local countries that you can't trust the local country culture politics to stop the problem. It's going to have to you unless you close the borders, you don't solve the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a question for you guys about this, because one of the places that, like I said, the trafficking was different in every place I went to. And one of the encampments in Morocco that didn't use boats, there was a small piece of land, or two small pieces of land, Ceuta and Melilla, which were essentially Spanish territory in Africa. And the borders were crazy there. Like, they'd be searching the cars and finding people hiding in like the engines and everything. Like, it was madness at the border when we were entering Morocco. But one of these groups that lived in the mountains, their prerogative was, we plan for certain seasons. So this month, we all raid the border at once. And they had like hand claws, all these different equipment made to climb the border. And they're like, if we all do it at once, they can't catch us all. And some of them had like massive chunks bitten out of their legs by dogs, and they'd get in fight. But like thousands would storm the border at once. And the idea was, and this is what they had been told, and what I thought afterwards was even true, the second they touch ground on the other side in Spain, they are entitled to a lawyer and potentially to be able to stay there. What's up with that? Do you guys know anything about this situation?
Well,
I defer to Robert.
It's the same as in the U.S. Depending on the country and depending on the location, that you may be entitled to asylum and due process procedures before you can be deported. So it's the reason why they got the idea in the States to get people over as asylum people here. And that's why Trump had the whole deal to remain in Mexico, because very few of these people would qualify. One can argue about whether the law of asylum should be what it is, but it's very, 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 very restrictive. It's hard for even legitimate political asylum seekers to get asylum. And you can argue about the fairness or justice of it, but that's the law of it. But procedurally, they understood once you're you're in their custody, inside their geographic territory, then that triggered a set of rights, either due process rights or asylum protection rights, that would prohibit them from deporting you without going through those procedures. And then if you have like what Biden administration is doing, basically a catch and release policy, then that just enhances that part of it.
But
yeah,
Lauren,
go ahead.
Lauren, I just want to say, like, I want people to appreciate this. I follow the chat. You have definitely attracted some negative comments in the chat, and I don't care, but it's good. People voice your opinions. But I want people to appreciate you are now, whether they like your reporting, whether they like your opinion or not, you're frontline, literally sleeping under trees with the migrants coming in. I mean, the first question I have is, How much at risk do you feel while you're doing this? And what is the thought process in terms of what you're going to expose yourself to in order to capture whatever story it is you want to capture?
Yeah, that was also part of the reason I took a break. I realized I was kind of rolling the dice one too many times. But I remember my security telling me when we were going up into the Moroccan mountains to meet these migrants, it had been only a few months after those two girls were beheaded in the mountains in Morocco, a different area, but still, it's some of these countries, there's just no law in certain areas. If something happens, you're gone, you're done,
And
right?
if nobody remembers that, it was two Danish campers, I think, in a cave, and it was a terrible. There was a video, but it was just awful. If anybody doesn't know the story, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, and there were absolutely some lovely migrants that we met, but you don't know in these areas, right? And people are desperate. When people are desperate, people are dangerous, and when they have nothing to lose, they're even more dangerous. And that's just, quite frankly, the situation here. And my security told me, he's like, whatever you do, just so you know, if something happens there, I basically can't do anything. I can try to hold them off. You guys can run. They'll probably catch you, but this is a gamble with your life. Do you want to do it? And only one of my cameramen would come with me. The other was like, no freaking way, I'm doing that. And also, I remember being terrified because my security told me, just so you know, we are going to have our guide. So this was one of the small boys, one of the guys under the trafficker that was guiding us to this encampment. He collected like money there and kind of kept them in the area, organized things. When we meet him, first of all, he had us go to a square in Morocco, and we had to stand there for an hour while he watched us to make sure, from an undisclosed position, to make sure we weren't like federal agents or something. We weren't meeting with anyone. So we just sat in the square. Then he came down and got us. And my security told me, whatever you do, don't let him sit behind you. We're going to have him sit in the front seat, because that's typically in bad situations where they'll put a knife around your neck and like make you drive somewhere or anything. He refused to sit in the front seat and demanded that I sit in front of him in the passenger seat. And I was like, and he basically said, no, we're not going to take you to do the story unless you sit there in the passenger seat. So I just remember the whole drive sitting in my chair, like just leaning forward, terrified that something was going to happen. And we were very lucky. We were very lucky in the sense that obviously nothing happened. And I don't want to give the impression that, you go into a poor migrant community and you're immediately going to get murdered. Of course, that's not the case. There are some wonderful people there that have just been highly misguided by traffickers, but there's dangers. There's no one knows where you are. The police aren't going to come get you. No cell reception, desperate people. We were arrested in Turkey. That was a scary situation. And, you roll the dice enough and eventually something will happen. I've just been very, very blessed. I have a mother who prays a lot.
Have you retired? Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Was that the first time you've been arrested? How often have you experienced that?
I've been arrested a lot. Never charged with anything, though. You wouldn't believe it. I have no criminal record, none. If you asked an online progressive, they'd say that I was literally a terrorist, which I was arrested under the Terrorism Act, but nothing has ever come of it. And it's actually such a waste of authorities' time, in my opinion. Maybe not. I mean, Turkey's a different situation, but in the West, like when I've been detained at borders and questioned for hours in Europe, I'm like, your time is being wasted by these crazy internet people that have made up stuff about me. And every time you find nothing, every time we talk, I'm like, yeah, whatever, go through my devices. I don't even care. Nothing, every time. It's a waste of my time, waste of their time.
I'm trying to think of the question. Oh, you go. Robert.
So, what was your scariest police encounter?
That was exactly what I was just about to ask you, Lauren.
Definitely the Turkish. So I remember being, and you know what? I'll give them this. That I do think that they are incredibly kind people. Like, I actually love the Turkish people. And when we were arrested at the border, the Bulgarian-Hungarian border, we were taken in by the military at first. We're talking like a big military truck comes up and we're like, hide the cameras. Like, hide everything. They come out with all their guns. We're, put on the ground and they're questioning us. None of us can speak the language. My security that we did have, obviously, a Turkish fixer with us, but he was off speaking to the head of this village nearby. We were brought in to the military, and I had this great security guard who worked for me when I was touring Australia, Clancy. And he's like, all right, we're fine as long as we stay in the military area. We're good because the military can't charge us with anything. They can't put us in jail. They could just hold us and ask us some questions. Brought us food, really nice. They even brought a doctor out, and I'll never forget her comment. She came to check on us to make sure we were physically okay. And she just said, "Whoa, you all have blue eyes. You look like Nazis." And we were like, what? About, and she just hadn't seen like blonde, blue-eyed people been arrested at the border before, and that was just her. She said that, we were like, what? And she takes notes, makes sure we're all okay, and then after like 2 hours with them, they told us we were being handed over to the gendarme, and my security was like, oh no, now we're screwed. So the gendarme come. It's this long mountainy ride. We're in the middle of nowhere. We get to the police station, and it's like something from a movie, like Midnight Express. There's a giant painting of Ataturk on the wall. Everyone's smoking in here. Wooden walls, old wooden desk, propped open window. It was just like crazy. They even gave us cigarettes, and they gave us little Turkish cookies and coffee and insisted we have them. And at that point, my Turkish fixer had found us. And I remember looking at him, and he was laughing. And I was like, why are you laughing? And he's going back and forth with them in Turkish. And he's like, you guys are so fucked. And I just start laughing too. And I'm like, what do you mean we're so fucked? He's like, you're so fucked. And he's like laughing. And I think he was almost trying to, make sure we didn't look guilty or whatever. But he said we were facing 5 years in jail, and that's what they were typing up on the computer. It's a really long story. It would take a long time to get into the whole story.
You're in Turkey. I presume you don't speak Turkish. You're in a jail in the middle of nowhere. No one knows where you are. You're in a system that you have no idea how it works, but by the looks of it, it looks like you can get tried and convicted within short order. Well, you gotta tell us how you get out of it. We don't go into the detail. How did it end?
It was a long night, I'll just tell you that. But there were some really lovely people that we met with. We actually had a lot of back and forth, almost joking a bit with the guys that had arrested us. We were all around on the back wall, and we had technically violated a military zone area. We had no idea. We were just trying to get some shots of the area, but we had technically violated a military zone restriction, which can get you in jail for sure. So they were writing up all of the police documents, and we were like 5 hours in. They were questioning us, and then they brought in special Secret Service. So all these guys in suits basically come in, and there's a woman that was leading them, and they have a separate room set up, and they're bringing us one by one to get questioned individually. And this was just one of the funniest / worst moments of my life is when I sit down and I've got 5 Turkish intelligence officers around me, and they start with, who are you and who's paying for you, basically? And I'm like, I am an internet meme. I am not a secret agent. I'm not even cool. I wish I could. I'll probably pretend I'm cool online, but I'm not. I'm literally just like a stupid internet commentator. Please, for the love of God. And then they bring up this picture, and it's a picture of me that I put on my Instagram for a meme, once again, and I'm in full burqa. I've got soy milk and Karl Marx, and they just say, explain this picture for us. And I'm like, how do I explain the soy milk meme and me wearing a burqa to 5 Turkish intelligence officers? How do I even begin that conversation? So I just told them, I was kind of, there's no point in lying. They have the internet. I can't say I'm not a critic of Islam. I can't, pretend. So I'm like, you know what? I was making fun of burqas. All right. And the girl, I'm not joking. The girl actually told me, who was running the questioning, she's like, I don't like them that much either. I was like, whoa, okay. And we sat down, and we ended up having a really long conversation. They're like, are you a racist? Do you hate immigrants? And I just explained my philosophy, and they're all kind of sitting there like, oh, I get that. That makes sense. You have to have similar values. And we actually had a great conversation. I'm not even kidding. They're like, this doesn't mean you're not in trouble, but
well, if you may, because I think this will segue into another portion of the discussion. What is your philosophy on that? I know that your philosophy, from what I've seen online today, from what I see in the chat, it's going to get the names. But what is ultimately your philosophy on immigration, on borders, on multiculturalism? I think I know what it is, but for those who don't.
Yeah. So I'll even give you the answer that I gave them. I was like, well, listen, I think that generally cohesive societies work better. Everyone has to agree to some overall ruling principle. Otherwise, you can't have a country. If you don't all agree to the same laws, if you don't speak the same language, you can't even communicate said laws to one another. You have to have a goal for the country that most people at least are aimed towards. And I told them, like, you are an Islamic country. That's what the majority of your people agree with. You all speak this language. I live in a country or a lot of countries in Europe, like Poland, they're a Christian country. And I think it's fine for people to have their own unique values that they pursue. And I think that immigration can happen where there's some assimilation, but you can't have it to the degree where a country changes overnight. You can't have it to the degree where you'll get internal conflict because you've basically created another country within a country. You can't just replace the Swedish people with the Japanese people and expect to have the same country values. And they completely were like, yep, 100% agree with that. And I remember they were even going on about, yeah, we have some big migration issues that have been impacting Turkey. Absolutely, because they are one of the countries where a lot of migrants go through to come to Europe, and they treat it like it's trash. They'll just enter people's houses, break into their farms, sleep in there, steal the stuff while they're on their way to go to Europe. And it's absolutely we don't think about it in the West, but it's ravaging for the countries they go through. You think of all of the South American countries that migrants going to America go through, and as they're going, a lot of them will just be, stealing stuff, sleeping in people's cars, and it's ravaging for the countries that become these trafficking routes. So there was a lot of common ground between me and the Turkish people who were talking.
Yeah, I was arrested once in France, but that was because I made the mistake of passing a Maserati. But that's another story.
What?
It's equally long. I made the mistake of comparing myself to Robespierre because they said, what's your job? And I said, lawyer. Like, I only knew a little bit of French, like Robespierre. And they're like, no good, Robespierre dead. While they were similarly laughing while writing something up, but luckily I was able to get out of there.
Yeah.
Wait,
David, have you ever been arrested?
I have never been arrested. I came very close, but that all stopped at the age of 15. And those are stories that I don't mind telling now that I'm no longer running for office. But those will be an AMA for a separate occasion. But never been arrested. I've never seen the inside of a jail cell. And I've never been to Turkey. I've never been to Morocco. The furthest I was in Egypt once and Israel once and France, and I think I stepped foot in Germany by accident. Just
France is pretty crazy, to be fair.
Well, that was in 1999. This was before the world became what it is. But no, but for the grace of God, I got extremely lucky in life. I crashed 2 cars and had a good accident. But no jail.
A good accident. I've never heard someone explain an accident as a good accident.
I totaled a Suburban by rolling it on a dirt road with nobody else around. It was a very fun day. But one day we'll get to those one day. But no, Robert, I had no idea. No lingering criminal record for either of you, I presume.
Oh no.
Zero.
I might be on some list somewhere. I might be on more lists than Lauren is, but but no convictions.
No, Robert, you're on lists because of what you've done professionally, not potentially criminally. But and Lauren, you as well, by the looks of it, because it's so Lauren, actually, one question: what have you, other than the Turkish arrest thing, what have you gotten into the most trouble for? What piece of content got you the most hate that you've ever seen online?
Okay, I can tell you exactly what that is. And first of all, just so you know, you're no better than Robert and I. You're on a list too now for talking to me.
I've come to grips with my fate.
Wonderful. My biggest criticism for content would be I did a protest against a boat called the Aquarius in the Mediterranean. And oh my goodness, the game of telephone people played with that is absolutely nuts. I am not joking. There's probably over 100,000 people that genuinely believe I was in the Mediterranean firing guns at refugees drowning. I'm not joking. Like, there are genuinely people who send me that every day and say I'm a horrific human being for doing that. Like, just sitting there laughing with fire around me with an AK-47 shooting at drowning people. Like, it's nuts. So the actual story there was a ship called the Aquarius. They were involved in picking up, they claimed publicly that they were simply going through the water as an NGO looking for people that were potentially in distress, but they were under investigation by the Italian government for acting as a ferrying service, actually going into Libyan waters and working with traffickers, picking people up and bringing them to Italy. Now, obviously, the problem there is maritime laws say you have to go to the closest port when you're rescuing people. You can't just go and ferry people. That's obviously not working as an NGO. That's working with the traffickers. And eventually, they've been shut down by multiple governments for doing this. But the Italian government had not shut them down yet. It took a few years before that happened. So myself and a few others went and protested the ship. Of course, this is a whole different story, but there was a group called Generation Identity involved, which are highly criticized. It got really late. The ship was supposed to take off at like 5 p.m. We were calling for days before trying to find out when the ship was taking off. And it ended up leaving at like 9 p.m. So it was super dark out. And we went to do a little protest, say, against illegal immigration. And because it was so dark, you never would have seen our little dinghy. We probably would have been run over by this giant tanker ship. So I took out a flare. I lit the flare. It was a handheld one and just held it above the boat. Now, to this day, everyone says I fired a flare gun at the boat to try and set it on fire and kill everyone on it or something. It wasn't a flare gun. It was a handheld flare. It would have bounced off the boat even if it were a real one. And there were no migrants on the ship. It was an empty boat. They hadn't even gone and picked anyone up yet. So that's the
But is this the story? Is this the incident that got you booted from Patreon where you were on a boat? Okay. And for anyone who hasn't seen Jack Conte, who's the CEO of Patreon, his video response explaining why you got booted from Patreon. And he said he came with some receipts. He came with some video evidence that said you were actively or proactively engaging in disruptive, potentially illegal behavior that could result in the loss of life. That's why you were kicked off Patreon, because you were interfering with rescue boats that were coming to rescue migrants who might have been capsized in the ocean while traversing from, I want to say, Turkey to Greece. I don't exactly know where it was, but so that was the incident. I mean, that was part and parcel of you being on a ship. Call it interfering with. And here's where I'll not give you the benefit of the doubt, but I'll still give you the benefit of the doubt. Even if you were doing what Jack Conte said you were doing, and I'll give you a second to respond in the first place. If that's the rationale, the amount of videos that I see of Greenpeace people deliberately interfering with ships, committing criminal acts in order to interfere with whale hunting, and whether or not these are not analogous causes, but these are logically analogous justifications where you have videos online of people interfering with lawful operations, engaging in potentially criminal conduct in order to interrupt those operations. And so if what's good for the goose is good for the gander, do it for one, do it for all. But if you don't do it for any, then don't do it for any. But as far as it goes, what's the response to Jack Conte's video where he came out with video clips saying you were engaging in unlawful activity, interfering with potential rescue operations, and therefore breaching Patreon's terms of service, which subsequently led to you getting booted from the platform?
Right. Well, you have such a lawyer mind, because those are all things that my lawyers brought up in the case, actually, when we were going against them. You know, that's the issue, isn't it? The statement was you could be partaking in activities that could potentially lead to loss of life. Well, what does that mean? Skydiving could lead to loss of life. You know, going in your car every morning could potentially lead to loss of life. Okay, so let's say it's in a protest manner. Sure, we protested this boat. We didn't stop it in any way. In this case, instead of like with the Greenpeace rallies, which, by the way, Greenpeace are actually and have active members on Patreon to this day, they were doing an illegal act to protest, in a lot of cases, legal acts, you know, transportation of fuel, whatever it may be. We were partaking in an act that was found to not be illegal. We were taken in by the Coast Guard. They said we were fine. And the boat was found to be conducting illegal activities, and they were shut down entirely. So that we were almost trying to enforce the law. Like, guys, this is a boat operating illegally. Like, stop it. And they did. So we brought in that argument, you know, what counts as activities that could lead to loss of life. You have people on your site right now that are members of Black Lives Matter or who promote Black Lives Matter. Their protests actually did lead to loss of life. Ours didn't. There was no loss of life in ours. So do you now hold an account that could lead to loss of life as in more contempt than one that actually promoted activities that did? The people who were out there rioting that died, got shot. Chaz actually took over city streets, destroyed things, stopped hospital ambulances from arriving. Like, that's the madness there. And that's why it was so obviously political, and why I think that in a big way, our lawsuit was shut down unfairly and, quite frankly, contrary to what should have been done legally.
Shut down on a technicality. And this might be one of the things, I don't want to get too into it if you can't discuss it. I hope you don't hear the kids screaming upstairs. And does anyone hear that? I hear noise.
That's all right. You might hear screaming in about an hour if we stay on.
That's not even my kid. There's another kid in this house. Okay. Well, on that note, sorry. It was shut down on a technicality in that you were deemed to not be an individual, but be a corporation, which then precluded you from, was it the arbitration or was it, how did that end?
So we actually had what we felt was a pretty strong argument because we didn't take the same. First of all, I was kicked off at a different time than Milo Yiannopoulos and Owen Benjamin, and we still didn't take the same approach. We decided to do, yes, breach of contract, but also breach of duty of care, which had been successful against Facebook in Germany before. It was basically saying, like, as a big tech company, and this hopefully would have been something that would have set precedent for other tech companies, you have a duty of care to people who make their living off of you, to give them a very clear sense of what your rules are, to give them a warning before you take away their income, to, give them a chance to appeal and hear their side of the story. Even on YouTube, you at least have the 3 strikes. You can put in appeals. Patreon had none of that. So they actually, quite seriously, I think, were breaching a duty of care. And my lawyers were very confident that this was going to be a successful argument. But we never got to that point because the first question in hand was what type of arbitration. Now, within Patreon's own contract, it says anyone who arbitrates against Patreon has to do it in the JAMS courts, which, as you guys know, are a private court system. So you have to pay for the arbitration fees. But the caveat that Patreon puts in there is this will be a consumer arbitration, so that you, as a little Patreon creator making $1,000 a month, will have ability to seek legal have legal representation against them because you don't have to pay the arbitrator fee as a consumer. Patreon does. So even though it's in a private court, Patreon has to take the brunt of the bill. That's in the contract, done, dusted, signed. So my lawyers were like, this isn't even a problem, Lauren. Don't worry about this decision. It's in the contract. The arbitrator gives us back his decision, said I'm a corporation, contrary to Patreon's own agreement that we both signed, and contrary to their previous decisions in the Milo Yiannopoulos case and Owen Benjamin case. And the arbitrator called me alt-right in his ruling, showing just like a clear bias, not even relevant to the case. We were mind-boggled. I think my lawyer forwarded me an email after that week of the JAMS courts. They're like, our goal in JAMS is to increase diversity and progress. And we were like, literally, now the courts are just these progressive kangaroo courts that our arbitrator, who was a Republican appointed arbitrator, can't even rule on the agreed upon contract between Patreon and I, because that might be seen as him agreeing with a woman called alt-right by Wikipedia.
Now, maybe Robert is probably in as much a position to answer this as you, Lauren, but you can't appeal that decision from the arbitrator?
We tried, and they just denied it. So we tried that, and they just said, yeah, no, it has to stay that way. So we could have continued on with the case technically, but the arbitration fees were $2,000 an hour. And as you guys know, the cases can take years. I can't pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for arbitration fee. I can't. So literally, this big tech case ended because they were rich and I was not. And that's what's the tragedy. It's like we were denied our opportunity to a fair hearing because of because of the decision made by this arbitrator. And, there will be people in this chat that disagree with me and dislike me and think I am alt-right or whatever. But the reality is this case would have set a precedent for anyone. Doesn't matter who they are, left wing, right wing, that there has to be essentially labor laws in the new Silicon Valley world that they've built. You have to give warning to an employee before you let them go. You have to respect them, give them legal options if a contract is broken between an employer and employee. And right now it's like the Wild West in Silicon Valley. Yep, take away someone's income, kick them off, left wing, right wing, doesn't matter. We need some laws there that actually force these Silicon Valley companies, no matter what your politics are, to treat people like human beings.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things there. One is, of course, what that boat was doing was risking life. Because the problem with saying you're going to go rescue people is it encourages and incentivizes people who do not have the means to travel over that water and are likely to die in the transit to make the transit, believing that someone's going to rescue them. And it's the reason why you don't do it. And so that's the real life-risking activity that was taking place.
That's why Australia ended their ships and they have 0 drownings. 0. They shut it down entirely.
Completely. I mean, we've had this problem between Cuba and Haiti in the past, that if we send any ships to rescue, it encourages a launch of massive numbers of ships, and many of them die because they're in these little rafts and all the rest. It's just a disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster what these people are doing. It's really just a pretext to support illegal immigration is all they're really doing at the risk of the lives of the illegal immigrants themselves. But in terms of what's interesting is the background for the Patreon, for those people who don't know, the reason why they have this consumer arbitration rule that says they will accept responsibility for arbitrators' fees is to get around state and federal law that limits the ability to impose costly conditions as an access to any judicial forum. Mm-hmm. And so that's the background for they didn't do this out of their own goodwill or their deep conscience. They did it so that their arbitration clauses would be enforceable in court by saying, look, we don't force this on anybody beyond in terms of the fee part because we pay all the fees. Now, they fought that in the Owen Benjamin case when massive numbers of people filed consumer claims because of their lack of access to Owen. There's another story about Owen, but we'll skip that for now. You talk about falling off the edge, dear Lord. But Earth's still not flat, Owen. But but aside from all of that, his legal claims though are legit. And that's the problem. But it's unfortunate. The arbitration system has no appellate remedies of any meaningful kind. You don't get access to a real court. They're hired by jams. So if you're a jams arbitrator, who's the repeat actor? The repeat actor is not you. It's not going to be ordinary people. The repeat actor is Patreon. So Patreon's going to have a lot of arbitrations. So what do you want? You want Patreon to employ you and not disqualify you as an arbitrator. So you're going to rule as often as possible for the repeat actors in the system, regardless of what your political background is. And it's just reinforced when they can make a virtue signaling, George W. Bush style political statement like he chose to do on 9/11. By doing what he did. So I think it's against the plain language of the law. The problem is the system itself is broken because the only adjudicator is the one who's corrupted in the first place, and the courts are not meaningfully supervising and scrutinizing arbitration contracts. And arbitration is always a disaster waiting to happen. It's a way for big corporations to have their own personal courts, and shock, those courts rule in favor of those big corporations.
Now, I'm bringing this up, and Lauren, I just tweeted you our contact, Robert and I's contact at Locals. Encourage Lauren to join Locals instead. Now, I don't need to know how well you were doing on Patreon at the time. You did fill that hole in the income bucket. And people throw the word grifter around as if there's something wrong with making money off your skills set and the value that you bring to the world. So some say grifters, others say hustler, and some might just say remuneration for the work you put in. Were you able to make that? Were you able to fill that hole in the bucket, so to speak?
I mean, yeah, that was one of the things that was actually going to be discussed in the legal case that went forward, was the fact that because there weren't that many options at the time, everyone at the time was like, yeah, Patreon, there are sites that exist, and censorship wasn't as crazy as it is today. It used to be a news story when people got banned on Facebook. I got in the Daily Mail when I got banned on Facebook in 2015, like mind-boggling how different it is now. Hey, but we had to design a site from scratch, essentially, to do donations when I was working for the next few years. And luckily, when I came back, they have things like Subscribestar, they have things like Locals, they've got all these other options, which is why, even though it can be really hard to get started and you're competing with massive industry, alt tech is absolutely saving lives right now, saving people's ability to keep their content online. So I love that.
Locals is, Robert and I don't need to sing their praises any more than we can or have, or it's amazing. Locals is amazing. It's like Facebook, YouTube, with a paywall for those who want to support, with an open community for those who want to see but not necessarily get to engage. You can support content creators, and you sort of get past what we're seeing is the troll filter that occurs when you don't have any filtering whatsoever, which is fine. Trolls sometimes keep people in check. They sometimes cause you to ask questions you wouldn't necessarily ask yourself. And then other times it's just distracting from the discussion. So it's there. I just DM'd you on Twitter, but Robert.
And the thing is, Local started all because of Patreon censorship. I mean, that's what triggered it. Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson and Scott Adams and some others got together in response to their kicking Sargon of Akkad, Carl Benjamin, off of Patreon. That they realized that what started with you and others was accelerating across the board, that sooner or later, nobody would have means of access through traditional big tech to be able to not only fund their content creation and their production activities, but also to be a place for supporters to gather in the way Facebook provided, a way in which you could share information and videos and podcasts, that all of that was at risk. And so it was thanks to Patreon censorship that created the market demand for locals in the first place and created the incentive for them to start it. And Locals has been fantastic by my book. And it's still the most censor-free independent platform supporting independent content creators anywhere. Now, in that sense, you started making documentaries. What got you on the path of doing documentaries?
Yeah, I got one comment I want to make first about your Locals. I have beef with you. My dad
really?
isn't even a paying subscriber to me, but he is a paying subscriber to your Locals. And he was giddy as a schoolboy when he heard that I was coming on here. So
the world is crazy because 5 years ago, could I have ever imagined Lauren, Robert doing a live stream and people watching it? It's not just that we're doing it. People are watching it. People are loving it. The world is weird and amazing sometimes. But what's your dad's avatar, Lauren? I'll make sure to look out for it.
Oh yeah, I don't want to dox him. He likes being a little bit anonymous.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hi, Mr. Southerns in the chat. Oh, sorry.
What was the question, Robert? You just asked a question.
What led you into documentary filmmaking?
Yes.
Oh, so definitely in by 2017, there was so much saturation in the YouTube market. It was still the Wild West, this brief period where if you were making content questioning the mainstream, it could end up on the trending page of YouTube. Like nothing like that today, right? But there were so many people getting into it that doing a video criticizing feminism, you'd put it out and there would be 2,000 other videos that day criticizing Anita Sarkeesian or whoever it was. And what was lacking, because there was such a saturation, was real deep dives into some of these subjects on the ground. And we were getting that loss, not just in the mainstream media, but also in the alternative media, of actual on the ground journalism. And I kind of figured that's the only way you get new stories. That's the only way you can add something new to the content going online. Now it's a bit different again, because there's been so much censorship, but so I did Farmlands, first of all, which was South Africa. There was constantly people tweeting me saying there are all these murders happening in South Africa. The government's so corrupt, and I didn't see it anywhere in the news. So I was like, what the hell? I'll fly there. And I think most of it, obviously, was just all paid for by like $5 donations here and there, a few Bitcoin donations. We literally couch surfed in South Africa, basically just sleeping on farmers' couches and in crappy little hostels here and there. Drove everywhere we could and made this documentary, and it went wild. I think it's almost got 3 million views on YouTube. People loved it. It was the first time people had really seen alternative media do something. Not the first time, I won't take that much credit, but it was rare to see alternative media actually have like movie quality footage and on the ground, because that is so expensive to do. Usually only CNN or these big organizations, Michael Moore, can do that on the ground type of documentary stuff. So wanted to throw a spanner in the mix there.
Well, I think was your experience from that what inspired you to keep doing it?
Oh, it's the worst thing ever, making documentaries. I literally have a mental breakdown every time I do it. And I'm like, why did I do this? It's so hard putting it all together, so stressful filming. You never know if you're going to get something interesting, and you could put like $100,000 of your own money. In Borderless, it was like 200 grand to make that, and you don't know how people are going to respond. You don't know. Sometimes we've lost footage. Like in Turkey, we mailed all that footage back, and we were mailing footage everywhere we went in case we were arrested and the hard drives were taken from us. So it was unbelievably stressful. And every time I do it, I tell myself I'm never going to do another documentary again. Absolutely not. And I can't help myself. Something fascinates me, and I see the mainstream narrative so mind-bogglingly different from what reality is on the ground. And I'm like, no, we need to do a deep dive there. That's got to be called out. So it's my own personal obsession and torment.
The thing about the South African farmers is that it was a story that wasn't just not covered, but it was being overtly denied and contradicted, and even in Canada, in the United States. And so I haven't seen the documentary that you did, but I know of that story in greater detail than most, but certainly not in as great as detail as many. But like it's a bizarre thing. You have this drive where you find a story that you see an injustice being done in your mind. Now, some people will call it racially or ethnically motivated controversies that you don't think are getting covered, which is why you get labeled as what you get labeled as, because you're covering certain stories that the media is not covering, which happen to be different demographics than the media. I mean, my question at the end of the day is, on a personal, spiritual level, how do you deal with all of the hate? How do you deal with the name calling? Does it affect you? Do you brush it off, or do you just say this is what I have to bear in order to do what I'm doing?
I feel like you guys probably have a bit of an idea of that as well, but I'll first address something interesting you said, which was, because you are always taking it from a different angle, because you're responding to what the mainstream say. And that can be a real challenge, because when you act like a balancing scale, people think that you agree with nothing the mainstream media say. Like, if the mainstream media are constantly doing documentaries on racism is bad, I could be like, yeah, absolutely, racism is bad, but there's 10 billion videos saying that doesn't need more attention to it. Racism against white people, I don't see a single video about that. I'll do that. So then people think, Lauren only cares about white people, when really I'm kind of, because I'm just focusing on this one side of issues that is being ignored, typically that gets portrayed as those are all of my views. No, there are a lot of things that I think the mainstream get right, but I focus on the things they get wrong. And right now the public narrative is, just largely white people bad, white people can't be victims. So that's, you know what? I'll tell you right now, if it were a different time, a different era, I have no doubt in my mind, I would be reporting the other way around. What's a story on Black people that is not being reported on because the media are currently extremely biased against them? Absolutely no doubt in my mind. That's what I would be doing then. So that perception can absolutely be shifted by responding to what the media's current narrative is. Now, how do I deal with the criticism? On some days it's harder than others, but for a long time it was super easy, because I just kind of shut off those emotional receptors to anyone online and told myself, the only people whose opinions matter are my family. If my professor said I was a horrible, evil racist, I would be heartbroken, because he actually knows me. We go for walks, we talk. If my father said that, I would be heartbroken, And that's how I kind of was like, whatever, don't care. It's a bit different nowadays, because now I think about what my son will read online. I think about how it'll affect my husband and my child and my wider family that hopefully grows. So it's a bit different nowadays, and it's a bit more painful now than it ever was before, because my family don't have those same kind of built up thick skin towards the internet, because they just haven't been in it like me. So yeah, that's the only reason I'd say it's a bit more painful now, and I'm trying to figure out how to deal with that. Maybe you have some tips. You guys have family and friends and have been dealing with some of the same stuff, eh?
Well, I say, since having run for the PPC, I think I've gotten as much online hate as I'm going to get. I had one of my posters. My posters remained largely intact, but one of them had the Schmashvika on my forehead. And then, I come back to my kids and I'm like, why would they put that on your forehead? For obvious reasons that I don't care to discuss publicly. I mean, everyone knows where I come from Europe. So putting a swastika on my forehead is about as idiotic as calling Ben Shapiro a white nationalist or a Nazi. But we laugh it off, but it's not that bad. But I like to think I'm sort of protected by the fact that I don't go out to be deliberately provocative, but the world needs people to do that, if only to force them to think. But I guess that comes back to one other question. It's like, do you regret the more provocative stuff, or do you think that is the necessary rite of entry into what you're doing now?
Oh, it's a hard ask, because once again, if you asked me before I was married, I would say absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'd probably be doing crazier things now. But because as you said, if you're not provocative, if you're not shaking things up, you're just helping the status quo to some degree. So now, because it affects more than just me, though, I have to kind of question, how is this going to affect the people around me? And undeniably, anyone who shakes up the status quo is going to be attacked by the status quo. And the status quo is more than just people's opinions online. It's the government, it's the legal system, it's potential jobs in the future, it's everything. So you shake up the status quo and you're potentially putting yourself in a world of trouble for the rest of your life. There are some people, there's a lot of political activists that are in jail in countries for their whole lives. They never get out. They end up in hiding. And you never know what's going to cross over that boundary versus what isn't, because it changes so often. That Overton window is shifting constantly. So something I did, 5 years ago that I was like, yeah, of course this makes sense, could be something that's made criminal 4 years later.
Now, what was it like to be the subject of a documentary? because it seemed like I got some of the people's I mean, Cernovich is Cernovich, so he's doing his own thing all the time. But it seemed like you really trusted him, and I was curious about what led to that. And because one thing I've always find, like a lot of my clients that find themselves in unexpected criminal difficulty, is because they have a certain idealism and they believe in the system, and that's actually what traps them. They're whereas an actual criminal would never have been in this position they were in. How much, and I've found this a lot with people on the right, there's a certain idealism about other people in the media that often is maybe misplaced ultimately. But what was your experience in that like?
So you're talking about the documentary that Cernovich and I were in?
Yes.
White Noise. Yeah,
White Noise.
that was a really heartbreaking experience for me, genuinely. Because I do not want to be someone who is constantly skeptical of the media. I do not want to be someone that is always looking over my shoulder like the lefties are going to get me. I really like to see we are more similar than we are different, right? And this guy Daniel approached me when I would have been like 20 years old at the time, and he said, I remember I said no to him like 4 times about this documentary. And then he sat me down and he's like, listen, Lauren, I am trying to paint a realistic version of what a conservative is. I'm trying to paint a realistic version of what a Trump supporter is, or someone who is part of this movement, because it's been done before. All of the just slander them, call them Nazis. That's been done before. I want to actually see the human side. And I think if you say no to me, then I'm just going to find crazy right wingers and that's it. And I kind of like felt a duty. I was like, oh, if we're going to show like a human side, then, I want to partake in this. And we got really, really close as friends. Like we spent dinners together. He came over and met with my family. My mom made him dessert and tea, and we really got to know him as like a good friend of mine, someone who he's held me while I've cried about things. It's like a genuine friend. And I remember when the documentary was about to come out. So one incident that occurred was there was a public figure who was really pushy with me. He wanted to sleep with me essentially, and I had rejected him. And this guy knew about that situation. He was in the car when I was on a phone with him, and I just kind of told him about the wider story. And I was like, no, I don't really want to talk about it because I don't like drama. I don't want to paint this whole victim narrative about me. Nothing ended up happening. There was nothing illegal. Like, there's no point. And, this guy has a wife. He's got a family. That's his, I'm really a believer, like, that's his demons to battle with, and not publicly, right? And I got a call. Sorry, I'm going to get emotional. I got a call right before this documentary was about to come out. And he basically told me, Lauren, I am going to say that you slept with him and you're a slut, and it's going to appear like that in the story instead of us saying what actually happened if you don't accuse him of sexual assault and do this story with us, like a big Me Too story. And I was like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want this in your story. Why are you acting like this all of a sudden out of nowhere? And just like his personality towards me changed instantly. And he just became this like threatening me, telling me he was going to release all this stuff on me if I didn't do what he said. And like, I could not believe this person. How can you pretend to be friends with someone for 4 years? How can you pretend you're like this nice feminist guy that, no, this experience you had, that's a woman's story. I care about you. And then everything he published about me later was so unbelievably false. Even The Atlantic had to go in and get angry with him. So like, one example was he suggested, so that we could save money at a chateau in France. Oh yeah, he suggested to save money. He found a chateau we could pay $100 to stay in outside of Paris. All of the hotels in Paris were like $1,000. And I was like, that's amazing. Book me a room there, $100. That's incredibly cheap. He wrote in his story that I stayed at a lavish chateau and wasted all of my subscribers' money, like basically eating caviar and vacationing. And that was his suggestion to save money, right? And he was the one who set that whole thing up. And like, to realize I was being set up, put in all of these positions, like, and to see how he cut conversations. He literally cut conversations halfway through sentences to make me say things I didn't say. I like had a whole on identity crisis after that documentary. I was like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to trust someone again. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to trust a leftist again. I genuinely, And I had to really reel that back and be like, this is one person, Lauren. This is one person. Oh, I'm sorry. It's quite
Well,
an upsetting.
No, but
thing.
it's one person. But is it one person working with a team and working with an infrastructure that says we're going to put this together afterwards? It's not one person who edits and shoots and produces and then distributes. This is one person within a production company who financed that documentary White Noise. Was it The Atlantic?
It was The Atlantic, yeah.
Well,
and I tried to take legal action, and they basically, it was just too expensive. Sadly.
Well, and also you're a public figure, and it has to be done with actual malice, and you have to go and prove it and get to court. And then someone said, this is why I record every single conversation, and you get burnt like this once, and it actually damages you as a person, where you end up then recording every conversation. You end up viewing everyone like they are this threat that you had met before. I first of all, I have not seen the movie, and nor do I plan on it. I saw enough of the previews on YouTube to know that this was filth of the highest order. Not knowing this. I mean, so, what was the reception of the movie? And did you get did people call out the guy, or did people hate you?
The one really good thing was that the movie was a flop. That was the one beautiful thing. I know they were trying to sell it to Netflix. They were trying to get it in theaters, and all of them said no, that they weren't interested. So they eventually kind of had to self-publish. They tried to get it into Sundance, and it was rejected. So that was the one thing that I was like, oh, thank goodness. At least, being this horrible doesn't pay off. But yeah, people obviously still saw it. And there were some horrible implications put in the movie. That was just like scratching the surface, what I talked about. Oh, sorry. It's a lot. It's a lot.
The individual who was the individual doxed in the movie, the one with whom you had the incident, or the
Oh yeah, they released their info publicly and everything, which I feel terrible about. I told The Atlantic, I was like, you guys secretly recorded this conversation I had with them. I did not consent to that. I did not. They don't care. It's content for them. So now I'm like, well, even though, like I said, that's their demons to deal with. That's their struggle. But now that's probably, hurt their family.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of confession through projection by that guy in particular. You listen to how he describes people that he's covering, and he's really talking about himself in terms of discrepancy between private and public life, and maybe some other things that are in there. I mean, my answer has always been to quote, when I have to deal with certain circumstances like this, to quote the movie Taken, that I have a certain special set of skills and that they should be aware of that before they go down that path. But that's why I took the Covington kids case pro bono, is because of what you talk about. The financial reality of the expense of litigation is what a lot of these big media institutions get to hide behind, and that it's so difficult to take on those cases that, and it's important, I think, increasingly to sue the individual involved. Because that, you just go after the institutions, they got insurance companies, they don't really blink twice. You go after the individuals, and suddenly they wake up and Kathy Griffin's tweeting about you every other week, whining about the suits.
Yeah.
But but from that, you decide to take a little time off. What went into? I mean, I understand the family aspect as well. You've gone through, from a very young age, kind of a crazy time period. What led to that decision, and what led to the decision to get back involved?
Oh, there were so many things that got into that decision. Like I couldn't pinpoint one, but to give a few examples, I mean, one is definitely like the trust aspect with other people online. It's all kind of the political games. People will throw you under the bus. They will lie about you. And online, the person who lies the quickest wins. Because if you actually have a sense of morality, if you actually don't want to, if you're not secretly recording conversations, if you're not doing all of this weird stuff, you're probably going to lose out. And the internet will just believe the first thing that's put out there. So the person who lies the first wins, chasing the fame, the attention. I really wanted to be able to live outside of that world. I wanted to ensure that I didn't need the likes or clicks. And I was doing this because I actually cared about it. And I kind of wanted to learn to live outside that world as one aspect. Obviously, I was pregnant, was going to have a kid. I just found out right before I quit, and wanted to focus on that and really be intentional about my child and my husband and focus on that world for a bit. I'll also just be real here. Because the conservative movement became so popular in 2016 and got so big, there was an aspect of it that wasn't really anything conservative. It was people that were talking about conservatism, but it was really just an excuse to make money and party. And there was like a really toxic aspect of the movement, quote unquote, where people were absolutely like doing drugs, getting involved in all of that kind of stuff as these giant conservative figures. And I was like, I do not want any part in any of this. And I'm no perfect human. I am not their judge. Everyone on every side of the political spectrum is like this, but I know that I am someone that is completely susceptible to peer pressure. So I just really needed out of it entirely to kind of get my grounding, because I am not a perfect person.
Well, now this will be a specific question that might segue us into what's going on in New Zealand and Australia. And it's a lighter note also, because I watched this interview with you and Stéphane Molyneux being interviewed by a New Zealander reporter. I didn't get the guy's name. It was on, it started with an H. If anyone in the locals chat, I sent that interview out before this live stream.
Patrick Gower.
What was the name of the news network? It was Hub or Hun or something.
News Hub. News Hub.
Okay.
Gower, yeah.
Now, so I know of Stéphane Molyneux. I don't know what your relationship with him is. That's part one of my question is, what is your relationship historically and currently with Stéphane Molyneux? I know of who he is. I watched some of his stuff. I know that he got depersoned. I know what people say of him. I know what he says that I agree with. I know that he says that I have problems with. But you got to explain this. So you're doing a speaking tour with Stéphane Molyneux in New Zealand. You book a venue. The venue, this is 2017, I think 2018. The venue gets canceled at the last minute, but you do an interview with this News Hub interviewer, and it was 20 minutes of a train wreck from the interviewer's perspective, which I imagine is why they turned off the comments on that station, on that YouTube channel. So first thing first, what is your past relationship, current relationship with Stéphane Molyneux, and then bring us into that, and then bring us into what's going on now on the other side of the pond.
First of all, have I been pronouncing Stéphane's last name wrong this entire time?
How do people pronounce it?
Molyneux? Molyneux? No, you're pronouncing it with like a French accent or something.
I took for granted it was French. Molyneux, because it's like
Molyneux.
Molyneux. Molyneux. I pronounce Molyneux. I don't know. So someone out there phonetically tell us how it is, but yeah, I would say Stéphane Molyneux. But
no, I've probably been pronouncing it wrong. I do not speak any French. I, for some reason, dropped out of French. You know, they make you in Canada take French, and I decided to switch to Japanese. So now I just can barely speak 2 languages, which is great. But Molyneux, we did a tour of Australia together. That was also early 2018, I think June, July then. It was so much fun. People just lost their minds, like protests at every venue, the media. We were like front page news every day, just saying basically pretty normal right-wing opinions. But Australia, their media is something else, like really far left in a lot of cases, which is weird because their country does have a lot of more right-wing aspects than even Canada and America, but their media were just wild when we were in the country. So yeah, we've done lots of interviews together over the years. We did our tour, and you know, we haven't talked much, especially since I took my break, but we're on good terms. I think I had a conversation with him like a month ago. I think he's raising some new ducklings in his backyard. It's more of like a friendly, like we don't talk about politics that much relationship. Like I'm friends with his wife and his daughter, and my parents know them well.
Yeah, I mean, Stéphane's a nice guy. I mean, I disagree with him on a couple of issues, but he always comes at issues from a good heart. In the ways he's been badly misjudged by a wide range of bad actors, including some people who threw him under the bus, such as a certain podcaster in Austin who probably, shouldn't, but that's another story. He's been good on some other topics lately, so I'll quit hitting on him. Now, what was it? Was that, like, obviously it wasn't your first experience, but what was it like going through that sort of Australian crazy hit piece after hit piece for just going and wanting to talk to some folks about some everyday ideas?
Well, it was amazing. And you could really tell how little thought was put into some of this. They were just like, yeah, she's a fascist. I remember Channel 7 put out a news piece, and they had a speaker, and the little bottom bar that like has what the topic is. It said, fascist speaker in Melbourne. And they spelt fascist fascist. So they didn't even, like, the guy was just like, yeah, white, blonde, right wing, fascist speaker, and they didn't even spell it right. So So many of these articles were just complete assumptions, complete character assassination. And it's almost beneficial at times, I've found in interviews, when they know so little about you, but have made so many assumptions about you, because you can really, when you're live at least, just destroy them. There have been interviews I've done with BBC where they're like, why did you fire that gun at the refugees? And I'm like, what gun? Tell me more about this. And then they just cut out that whole question period before they put it live. But Patrick Gower did not have that opportunity. We were completely live. So every nonsensical accusation he put to us, like, we've heard this a million times. Here's your response. Did not go well for him. The man is still coping to this day. I'm not joking. 2 weeks ago, he published a full-blown documentary about that interview where he's nearly crying, talking to a political scientist, saying that his failure to interview us properly essentially led to the Christchurch shooting. Like, that's the level of narcissism. Like, I can't even explain to you.
It was first of all, like, now my issues with Stéphane Molyneux, and they're not personal issues. I appreciate he gets into he started doing it in that interview where the reporter cut him off, getting into the IQ discussion, the cross-cultural IQ measurements, where I have issues with that only because it's an absolutely useless distinction to make that only leads to broad generalizations, whereas on an individual basis, it's good for nothing of an observation, even if one assumes that what Stéphane is saying is, statistically or scientifically demonstrable. So I mean, that's where I take issue with some of the discussion, which tends just to encourage certain people who think, hey, look, I'm on the good end of the IQ spectrum, so I get to judge those who are not based on these charts. But that interviewer cut it off, could not engage in the discussion, and I mean, I could see how that could be traumatizing for him because he was not prepared to deal with the pushback. But now you got the taste of that in 2018 before we saw Australia and I guess New Zealand as well fall off the deep end of this COVID stuff. And this is where I don't want to get anyone in too much trouble because you have to go back and live there. But was that setting the groundwork up for what we see happening now in that part of the world?
Well, so Australia in general is a bit different from America and Canada in the sense that they always actually have been a bit more authoritarian and structured. You think of them as like, oh, there's just these blonde dudes surfing and like wrestling crocodiles or whatever. And that's a big part of it, what people see publicly. But the government has always actually been a bit more authoritarian. And I would honestly chalk that up to them being in the Pacific. People, once again, don't really know. Australia did have ground battles technically during World War II where Darwin was being bombed constantly and the media were having to cover that up. We don't want people to know we actually have the Japanese on our shores. There were submarines in Sydney Harbor, like they were dealing with ground warfare. And when it comes to war in the Pacific, like they've been deployed plenty of times to all of those small islands. They're dealing with very close quarters with China. And quite frankly, they're ramping up for potential war with China. So they are going to be the battleground for a potential war in the Asia Pacific. And I think that part of that authoritarianism comes from such a current idea of what it feels like to be at war on your own land. Whereas we kind of in Canada and Australia, or Canada and America, it's like, well, we'll be sending soldiers to go fight on Australian ground against China if we go to war with them, right? So there's that aspect. And then, of course, just the corruption of media in general is a huge problem. I'm shocked, though, to see, definitely, I get the wanting structure because of potential war, but it's almost like they've gone full Caligula, like declaring war on the sea. We've declared war on a virus. We have declared war on nature. I don't know if anyone's ever heard the poem by Rudyard Kipling, The God of the Copybook Headings, that says men have always tried to conquer nature. They have always tried to deny it, and it always wins at the end of the day. And that's what I see it. It's like they've declared war on nature and they are going to lose. You can't have zero COVID cases. It's impossible. And it's insane to even try it.
Have you been surprised at all at how Canada has gone in this respect? What both you and Viva share in common is you've both been candidates for office in Canada. So I was curious about that common experience. But have you been surprised at the native land going as strong as it has gone in the sense of this, talking about vaccine mandates and passports and lockdowns and all the rest?
Yeah, like, it's crazy because if you've even brought this up a year ago, people will be like, vaccine passports, you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. They just want people to get vaccinated. And it's like, I'm fine with people consensually getting vaccinated. If you think it's good for you, go right ahead. No worries. But yeah, the mandates. I was starving the other day and I went to go grab some food. Nope, second class citizen, can't eat. I was like, oh, gee, I forgot about that for a second. I forgot my native country is like this. But, I'd actually be curious to get your opinion in a second here, David, because I actually thought this election was a good thing, but I want to hear your opinion first.
I will say this I will preface this by saying whatever they say on daytime radio is the polar opposite. Whatever they say, is the opposite. So CJAD, Elias Mackos, who blocked me on Twitter, and I don't care because it's such a cowardly thing to do, and it wasn't even for a big thing. I don't do bad things on Twitter. Elias Mackos on Twitter said, starting June, if you want to see me in person, you're going to need to show proof of vaccination. And Twitter being what it is, I thought it was a joke or I wasn't sure. And I said, is this a joke? And then I got blocked. But Elias Mackos on CJD is saying the Liberals won this election. It was good for the Liberals. I was like, how is it good for the Liberals? They called the election obviously thinking they were going to gain seats and gain a majority government. Instead, what they did is they ran an election that cost Canadians $600 million, which is only 100 and some odd million more than ordinary because COVID. They ran this at a divisive time. It cost a lot more money. It pissed everyone off. They ended up with the same minority government they had before, and we all got to see Justin Trudeau for the wicked tyrant that he is. Because do I swear? The shit he said during this election cycle, no one's going to forget. I'm not going to forget it. Those people are putting us all at risk. Those people are putting my kids at risk for the virus where we know the stats. And he let his, people put the mask on to protect from the virus. He let his mask slip and revealed that he is the virus in all of this. And so this is a massive loss. I don't care. It wasn't the victory that I thought it was going to be for the PPC or for a voice of reason. But to say that this was anything other than an abject failure for the Liberal government is the spin that only $1 billion can buy. That's what I think of that. I'm sorry I swore. Lauren, what did you think of it?
No, I thought it was a massive success. Not even, Trudeau outside of the whole question. The Conservative Party obviously took a different approach, which was we'll just become Liberals. So, which I've never understood because it's like, okay, great. You're going to take on a bunch of Liberal policies. You think you're going to win a more Liberal population. But if I were a Liberal in Canada, I'm just going to vote for the actual Liberals that have Liberal policies instead of the people pretending to be Liberals to win an election. Like what? But on top of that, they're now the PPC, whatever people think of them, they are the only political anchor on the side of liberty, on even more conservative values, whatever it may be, just more libertarian. They're the only anchor on the political compass stopping the slow shift leftward. And if you add up the numbers, the Conservatives would have had a minority government had they gotten the PPC vote, and they absolutely deserve to lose it. They absolutely must know now that they have to appeal to Canadians that have an appreciation for their rights and freedoms if they ever want to win an election again.
This is the thing. It's like a minority conservative government is as useless as a minority liberal government. It doesn't make a difference. There would have been no victory one way or the other. But what this is going to do is effectively, my prediction is it's going to force Trudeau out because you run 3 elections and you're still a minority. You might want to get the hint that people hate you and not necessarily the party. And Aaron O'Toole might want to think that people hate him and not necessarily the Conservative Party. So they get these 2 feckless leaders out. They stand for nothing. They are flip-flopping liars to your face. Trudeau 6 months ago saying, we're not a country that makes vaccinations mandatory. Then come election season, whoa, did he flip that tune around? You got O'Toole. It revealed that all of these politicians are nothing but power-hungry hypocrites. And despite the fact that the PPC didn't get 1 seat and I barely got 1,500 votes, that hurts. I'll tell you what, that hurts a little bit. But I had the revelation today. To convince one person takes one-on-one. To brainwash a city just takes the media. And that's what you realize you're fighting against, is you can walk door to door and talk to people one by one. You don't have that sweeping power that fake news media has. But yeah, I think it's a great victory for everybody. Our politicians suck. Our political parties suck. And it's not just that the PPC doesn't suck. The PPC is the voice of reason, but you can't help people who don't want to help themselves. So you have to get there. Robert, what do you think?
Well, I mean, didn't you get 5 times more votes than the PPC ever has in your district? I
Yeah.
mean, so and the PPC got over 5%. I mean, they all the people who took the bet paid off. So, I mean, from the gamblers were happy. The PPC exceeded the 3.7% that the odds makers put on them. And I think there's that side of it. The other side of it is there's part of Canada that is much more statist than I think a lot of people would want to be the case. I think we're seeing it throughout the Western world. I mean, only parts of the United States, frankly, is pushing back. Almost all of the Western world, the UK, same way. I mean, there you have a nominally conservative government, good on Brexit, but been very bad on lockdowns and vaccine passports and the rest. Only now is Boris suddenly retreating from some of those positions. See it in Australia, obviously New Zealand. I mean, here you have a New Zealand. Look at a country that invented bungee jumping. That, when I was there, they took me up in a helicopter, and as soon as the helicopter guy figured out I didn't like being in a piece of plastic thousands of feet in the sky, he decided to go as close to cliffs just to see my reaction for kicks and giggles. This is the country that's locking down now. It's like these are we have such a strong streak of freedom throughout the Western world. To see us forfeit that in the name of a virus has been sad to watch. But that's the negative news, that there's a part of Canada that looks like California. But there's also a part of Canada that values freedom, independence in a way that quintupled the vote of the People's Party and made it a serious contender in the future. And that's the rewarding and encouraging side. And even in a district as liberal as Viva's, he could get the votes he could get. To me, is impressive, because it's like running in Manhattan or Malibu. You get any votes out there on the freedom side, you've done very well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the compliment, Robert, but I still feel personally Viva getting his black. I mean, like I said it yesterday, I went off yesterday. I was so stupid. I thought I could win, but I thought I could get 10,000 votes. Now I realize what is involved, and it's an entire not a microcosm. What's the word? It's an entire ecosystem that the government buys off the media. The media controls the airwaves. They control the discussion. They control the censorship. They control the unpersoning. And Lauren, I have not felt it so much now, but you see it, and they can manipulate thought. It's a wonderful, powerful thing. But Lauren, okay, hold on. What is next now? What is next for you? Actually, I mean, you got to head back to the land down under.
I'll try. I wanted to make one comment first. That comment you made about the media. This is 100% why I think Trump deserved to lose the last election. He had years to do something with the Republicans about Section 230. He had years to do something about the massive issues with tech censorship and media, and did nothing. And the Republicans have no one to blame but themselves for that. No one. Much like the Conservatives have no one to blame but themselves for what happened this election in Canada. Every place I saw, especially like places like Yukon, where the independent candidate who got kicked out by the Conservatives for being against vaccine mandates got 14%, the Conservative got 26%, and the Liberal got 31 or something. Obviously, he would have been in a nice 39% majority had they kept him there, won the seat. But they lost because the Conservatives decided to abandon their base. And I loved that. I love it. I hope it stings. I hope it stings, and I hope they remember it. But yeah, it's time to stop blaming the libtards all day. It's time to stop blaming the censorship. A lot of our politicians, well, we on the ground can, but our politicians have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and start caring about the issues that are actually winning elections. And they haven't been. They've been debating stupid stuff like, like really dumb policies here and there about how many women are in this certain cabinet or whatever. Like, no, the media is a problem. Slander is a problem. Trudeau's pumping so much money into them right now. Big tech is a problem, and they're not taking any of it seriously enough. But what's next?
So what is next for you? Do you have any documentaries on the what's the word? Horizon?
I put out a very tiny little mini doc. It's not really a documentary. It's more like a long video on the mass graves in Canada a few days ago. It was an on-the-ground report, did some actual journalism, called up people involved, spoke to the Archdiocese. Did you guys hear about the mass graves story in Canada?
Right. And the media comes out on the eve of the election and pretends it's a new discovery. We just discovered mass graves in Canada. Lauren, go ahead and explain it. But I mean, we've known about this for Truth and Reconciliation Commission report came out 2015. We've known about this for decades.
What's terrible is, so first of all, yes, the ones where there are potentially bodies, which is only one really the Kamloops one, 215 potential bodies. GPR, they haven't dug it up. They have no idea who's under there, why they were buried, if it was a graveyard. No idea right now. If it is the case that there are Indigenous people buried there, yes, like you said, Truth and Reconciliation acknowledged that if people died, typically of disease, tuberculosis was huge at the time, there was a government policy not to send them back to their families to save money, which is gross, which is awful, of course. But like you said, already known about in the Truth and Reconciliation. The other two graveyards that came out, 751 bodies and 182, not even joking, not Indigenous children, nothing to do with the residential school. They were both overgrown graveyards that they just decided to come out and say were mass graves of children. And the media took with it. They just completely decided to report that. And when you say the word mass grave, the UN definition of mass grave is 3 or more bodies touching each other, buried to hide them quickly after an extrajudicial killing. That's the implication. Not people in a graveyard buried of all ages in individual graves. Like, it's actually mind-boggling.
Well, for sure. Now, that was the first, because when I had the same reaction, and so did the rest of the world. There was the caveat that during this residential school period, they were apparently, some of the schools were instructed to, or did in fact, conceal the number of deaths so that they would not have to report as a high number of deaths. So they did in fact possibly potentially create mass graves in that they were burying children without disclosing them in unmarked graves. The only, the biggest issue is, and it's the double slap in the face. It's the left and it's the backhand and the forehand, is the government knew about this. They've known about it for a long time. They had the names of all the children that were unaccounted for that Trudeau now pretends, we just discovered it. Let's go get a photo op of me kneeling over an Indigenous child's grave with a teddy bear because we know that we're going to call an election in a month. It's enough to make you want to spiritually puke. I mean, literally, because it's just exploitation of the highest order and dishonesty of the highest order. And then meanwhile, give me another 3 years and I'll do wonders for foreign aid and all good things for the international community. When
I have to comment here, because that teddy bear grave that Trudeau took the photo at, that was actually a community graveyard that was built 13 years before the residential school was even opened there. So they'd have he could have been over a 67-year-old man's grave who died of syphilis. It's not. And even the chief Catamus said that this is a community graveyard. It had markers before in the 60s. They were destroyed. Catamus Delorme claims it was a disaster because he says the Catholic Church destroyed them and said a rogue oblate priest took a bulldozer and destroyed them. And the media reported that the Catholic Church accepted this explanation. I spoke to the Archdiocese. They said they have absolutely no records of this priest. They just don't. And they never confirmed that to the media. So like you said, 100% horrors that happened at residential schools. No one in Canada denies this. I have no doubt that there were children that were buried, that they were trying to hide potential deaths. But in these cases, and this is what the tragedy of these lies are, is it's actually going to make it a lot harder for people to believe Indigenous stories. And it's actually going to make it a lot harder for people to believe, if they do come out and find some of these graves, or even just the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in general, because they've lied about these other graves.
Well, and that was one thing I was curious about, whether this was true in Canada, because it's true in parts of the United States for sure. It's Native Americans, for example, disproportionately are not in favor of taking the vaccine. And I'm curious if the same thing was true in Canada. In other words, that in the name of defending the Indigenous, he wants to have the state do some medical experimentation on them.
Robert, it's and Lauren, you'll probably be better off to feel this than me, but it's that plus 10. It's like, it's the double whammy. They don't want to. The government does not want to factor in the historical injustices that have been done, and at the same time then say, I think it's 52% of Indigenous population in Canada have been vaccinated or fully vaccinated, and that's a problem because they should all be fully vaccinated. So the problem is not that they might have reasons for which they don't want to get vaccinated. It's that the Bonnie, whatever her name is, Lauren, help me with the name of Bonnie
Henry, or who?
Bonnie Henry. The Bonnie Henrys, the Justin Trudeaus, the white saviors know what's good for these minority communities. And if they don't want to do it on their own, they're just going to need a little incentive to do it. So let's just, implement the vaccine passport. And now you have BLM in New York protesting the racism of the vaccine passports coming from our own Justin Trudeau. And if I dare say I had an undumb tweet on Twitter, I said, it's not the pictures of him in blackface from 20 years ago that makes him a racist. It's the policies he's implementing today that makes him a racist. But Lauren, I mean, you know the demographics on vaccination of minorities in Canada, it's lower.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I find and why you can know that the media are lying to you, because all of these articles are about these dumb Republicans not wanting to get vaccinated. It's all these right wingers. And I'm like, you guys are so dishonest. And this is also the reason they're never going to get over what they see as this massive issue of vaccine hesitancy, because they're not even looking at it properly. They think it's just dumb Trumpist conspiracy theorists. No, like some of the, like you said, the largest groups not getting vaccinated are typically in the Islamic community, which of course there can be white Muslims, but a lot of them are immigrant Islamic community, Indigenous community in Canada, the Black community in the States. They are the largest groups of non-vaccinated at the moment. And you're not going to convince them to get vaccinated by telling them that they're just being white racists. And that's why they don't want to get vaccinated. They're just dumb Trump supporters that want to kill other people. Like, you actually have to deal with the issue. One suggestion I heard, if you are pro-vax, something you could do is promote Novavax, which was traditionally made in the same way that every vaccine you took as a kid was made. It's not mRNA, but that's not being rushed through. That's not being given the same treatment as the mRNA vaccine. So why aren't they talking about solutions that bring people together, make people more comfortable, different approaches that aren't forcing people to do something they don't want to do? Why aren't they testing for antibodies and in fact reporting in some cases? I think Vice just reported that natural immunity doesn't exist. It's actually absurd the amount of medical misinformation the mainstream media are spreading and not getting banned.
No, but Lauren, like we're in Canada and everywhere else nearing 2 years into this, and in Canada, 80% vaccinated. And if you're in the vulnerable group, you're 95+% vaccinated. And instead of at this point, looking at rapid testing, you're looking at vaccine passports. And during the debate with Mark Garneau, who won the riding with over 50% of the vote, he says, we have rapid testing. So first of all, he got called out by the crowd because we don't have rapid testing, regardless of what they think we have, access to. There's no rapid testing in any meaningful sense. But instead of focusing on rapid testing, because more important than being vaccinated, now that we know that the vaccinated can contract and transmit the virus, is knowing if you're negative. So why the emphasis would be on the vaccine passport, and now it's going to extend to 5 to 12-year-olds as soon as they push that through for the vaccine. Why focus on that and not rapid testing? I mean, it's a government looking for a problem to regulate. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. And when you look at the way they deal with the minority groups who don't want to get vaccinated, in Canada, it's Black, Latinos, Indigenous, and religious minorities. When you look at the way they deal with it, it's not, we understand and we appreciate your reasons. It's you don't know better. You still don't know better for yourself. And we're literally reverting to the very same problems we had over the last 100 years, the government thinking they know better for the citizens and the minorities and doing things in their own best interest. It's plus ça change, plus ça reste le même. It's crazy.
Yeah, my old Native American Indian law professor, who was a chief of his tribe and family friends with Russell Means, always said the most dangerous thing for any Indian is when a white Indian-loving liberal comes in the room. But and he had deep truth to that. But what is next for Laurent Southern?
Oh, yes, that was the question. What is next? I have to kind of work on another documentary idea. It's a bit difficult right now with all of the restrictions. And quite frankly, there's just not as much support for alt media as there used to be, for various, some good, some bad reasons. Also, the inability to just even have people see your videos anymore. Like I don't know about you guys, but I used to be at 80% recommended, the viewers that I got on YouTube. It was 80% of people were seeing me in the sidebar and saying, oh, that's an interesting topic. It's like 0% now. Just there's no exposure for content. So it's a bit challenging, but I'm going to keep puttering along, enjoying my real life, touching grass, and seeing what I can talk about here and there that I'm allowed to talk about, but will also push boundaries. Unfortunately, I hate to even say that, what I'm allowed to talk about, right? But like what's not going to stop me from being put in jail almost, from not being able to see my family and friends. But there has to be a balance. I still want to 100% push boundaries and say things and represent people that, can't have a voice. There are so many people out there that would love to have their opinions heard, but they're scared of losing their job. They're scared of losing their family. They're scared of the position they're in. And, the three of us, even just doing this show, we're representing those people and letting them know that they're not alone. And I'll keep doing that the best I can, as I know you guys will.
Absolutely. Now, Lauren, I did screenshot or take pictures on my phone of questions I had to ask you. One was from Rumble Rants. I think it's sort
Yes.
of a joke. It's Mr. Mike. Mr. Mike, has Lauren ever considered doing voiceover work for other documentaries producers? I think it's because you have a very good voice, is what they meant.
Really? People are usually, they call me Lispy Lauren, and I've got a man voice, but I appreciate it.
You do not have a man voice. Now, I lost all the other ones. There was one from, son of a bee sting. Well, I seem to have lost all of it. Oh, gosh. Well, there was one from Tony Niev, says, Lauren, when you getting rid of Samantha? Okay, I don't know who that is. I don't want to start any fights. That looked like it might have been starting a fight. Lauren, where can people find you?
If you look up my name, it may or may not come up on YouTube. Laurent Southern. You can subscribe to my channel or find me on Twitter at Lauren_Southern. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.
Thank you very much. And soon to be on Locals, because I sent you a contact. You need
I'm going to have to do it.
It is the absolute replacement of all other forms of content creator support. Patreon.
So you can live stream on there. You're live there right now.
No, we're not there. You can live stream one person at a time. Robert and I we'll figure it out, but they'll figure it out. So right now we live stream on Rumble, we live stream on YouTube, but you can do individual live streams very easily. Robert and I do them. Robert does them more often than I do. You just pick up your phone, live stream. You're direct to your crowd. It's amazing. So
it has video capacity, podcast capacity, Facebook interactivity, all of that, and a means to provide support, and your community gets to interact with each other. So they and get to give you ideas. I get probably 2/3 of my topic suggestions from the Locals board itself. So it's really it's what Facebook was meant to be. It's what it's what YouTube was kind of meant to be. Mm-hmm. It's not to the full scale technologically yet, but it is getting there. And it is the most censorship-free. You're totally free to say whatever you want. You get to curate. You own your own community. They don't own it. There's no algorithmic manipulation, which actually throws people off initially.
That's why I joined Twitch for a bit, because I liked that it was very community-based. It was all about like having people interact, but I just got banned off there for a few weeks. So
okay, sorry, let me get this down. You'll be on Locals sooner than later. Locals is what Twitter and Facebook were meant to be. And it's just a little filter that gets the trolls out, although you still have some trolls who support, but trolls are not always bad. Sometimes they're genuinely good. So anyways, but that's it. So Twitter, YouTube, soon to be on Locals, Lauren. And people had some recommendations as to what you can look into in the future. The chat for this replay will be up, Lauren, if you want to go read it. Because I did listen to the super chats, but thank everybody in there for doing this, for supporting us, for joining in. Thank you for some pushback. Thank you for some negative comments. Thank you for all the good comments. Lauren, thank you for doing this. Robert, thank you as always. Stick around. We'll say our proper goodbyes. Everyone else in the chat, we will all see you Sunday. Peace.